Hey everybody, welcome to the July open office hours with OriginTrail. Your host, Guinnessstache, with my new shirt that I got from the team for Father's Day, which is amazing. Today we have Branimir and Tomaž. So I think we're going to go through some of the questions we got. This time we're doing a little more technical than it was last time, which is was the community really wanted us to get more deep into the tech. So I have all your questions here. I can never get to all of them, but I took a lot of the best ones I thought are the most relevant that the community really wants to see answered. So I think we'll kick it off, right, guys?
Sounds good. Sure.
All right. Awesome. All right. So the elephant in the room question, right? So first one I'm going to open up with, because everybody just is dying to know. So how does the team plan on handling Ethereum gas fees? Are you exploring ways around dealing with the gas issue? And I know there's a lot of different certain scaling solutions like ZK rollups you're hearing about out there with like Loopring and stuff like that. And Ethereum fees are really high. Some of the payouts, are using more gas than they're worth in the payout. So how is the team addressing it? Is it kind of like, let's wait to see what happens with Ethereum 2.0? Or are there some other types of technologies being looked at in order to maybe scale that, or maybe bulk transactions together within the smart contract?
So yeah, we're all aware of the issue. It's really been happening a lot lately because the whole, I believe the whole DeFi scene has been booming with activity, and essentially what kind of it comes down to is it can take several different sort of groups of approaches, we could say. One is to actually try and minimize or somehow optimize the contracts, so the transactions use less gas. So even like if the gas cost goes up, you're still using a significantly less gas. So that's one approach. So having your car spend less gas. The other approach is putting your car in sort of a different lane in the highway, and that would be either some sort of a scaling solution that could be either something like ZK rollups or even state channels. And that's another approach. And then the third approach would be to even sort of find alternatives in terms of specific transactions if there are options of sort of editing the protocol in that sense that you can even not use the chain. So think of it as either we move something off chain that we can sort of cleverly think of a way, of having it off, where it doesn't necessarily maybe need consensus on that level. So that's one way. The other group is using the chain but using it sort of better in some way. And so what I can tell you is that we're actually working on that already. There are several things that are ongoing. And actually one of I believe the next update, the 4.1.8, is actually going to address part of it. So in short term, there's going to be some optimizations on the smart contracts that are going to have the transactions cost a little less gas. When I say a little less, I'm meaning, sort of not like, 60% less, more like sort of on the order of magnitude of 10, but it's an improvement. And it's in short term, it's going to be, it's going to be significant if we keep seeing gas fees around 70 or 80 GWA, and so that's one thing. And the other thing is actually that I mentioned already, sort of is trying to go away from, the 10% or so to more towards, significantly less fees. And in that sense, that would require a little more sort of improvements in terms of editing the way the protocol works, so how the nodes interact between each other. And one of the ways is, for example, state channels. So if nodes, if nodes are known, and if they already have some sort of history before, it would make sense that they have the ability to utilize some sort of a state channel. And in a way that's not that far away from the smart contracts that are already implemented on the ODN, because if you're an ODN node runner, you will know that you need to deposit tokens before actually using the protocol. And that's when all the tokens actually get sort of all the interactions happen within the smart contract until you withdraw them. So in a way, it's sort of a proto state channel.
So in that situation, would you have multi-channel state channels, or is it just non-multi-channel state channels?
Yeah, so that's really sort of the domain of research at the moment. So the team is looking into it, and over the course of the next 6 months, we're really looking at how we can optimize both the costs and we're looking at both multi-channel and single channel, depending on, again, how you see the interaction. Because one of the great things about ODN is that we have sort of the way to interact on 2 levels. So you can have interactions through the chain in some way, or you can directly interact on the network, because the network is a peer-to-peer network and all the participants belong to the same DHT. So essentially you're able to have different types of interactions, and ideally you optimize so that you have the best of both worlds. Obviously that would be having some sort of an interaction where we can move a lot of these sort of transactions between two different nodes in a way that they're governed by the smart contract, but not necessarily totally always enforced in such a way. So potentially that we can make some trade-offs in order to make things cheaper, yet still very, very trustworthy, I would say it like that. Right. The thing there is that we're definitely, one point I would like to make, we're definitely not sort of waiting for a miracle to happen in terms of gas to go down to 0, or ETH 2.0 to be here and within the half year we have in front of us. So we're actually focusing on that within the next half year quite a lot. And awesome. There's an additional component to it as well that's going to also be partially influencing the whole development, is really the actual cost management on the side of the node runners. So currently the latest sort of node version supports the 4.0, still the same mechanism since about 6 months ago, when Lambda as a parameter was introduced. Well, one of the iterations that we've had internally was actually how to enable further ease of use. So that, for example, if you see a lot of movement of cryptocurrency value like Ethereum or Trace, that you have some sort of ability to have the node sort of react to these movements by itself. One of these ways was actually up until now, for example, on the DC side, to decide if a node wants to perform a publishing of to actually have a job created at a certain point in time. So if, for example, it's too costly, the node can delay this creation, and that's been happening a lot for any time really the gas price goes really far up.
So when we see on OThub like job not activated yet, I'm assuming that's just because it's in limbo waiting for the gas prices to come down before it was to go live.
Yeah, so you could see either that, or you could not even see the job at all start. So essentially, just the node sees, okay, it's really too costly for me, because it has a certain gas price limit. You can actually see in the configuration, and if the gas price limit is reached and the price went above, the node will actually in the command executor, which is the sort of the heart of the node, it will just delay this next command, which is to actually publish the offer. So this is done in such a way just to make sure that we are not relying on the congestion on Ethereum. So in that sense, for non-critical offers and data that can wait for maybe a few more hours to be published, this works quite well. For something that's urgent, there's an urgent parameter, and some nodes will even publish, and that's possible. So whoever wants to, it's up to everyone running a node to decide if they want to publish for a bigger amount of cost.
And sorry to keep going on about this one, but it is a big one. A lot of people ask in the community. That's why I really wanted to focus on it. So are you in any way seeing the gas prices preventing any sort of ODN usage? Like, is there anybody whoever or waiting to say, hey, we need this gas prices to come down before we get to this next step? Or has it really been that much of a barrier yet? Or are things just kind of business as usual?
I mean, it's a significant increase, right? So it's not just for the node runners, obviously, it's also for publishing data sets. So it's like, it is something that doesn't necessarily hinder the use case of ODN, but it definitely does pose a thing that you think about, right? So how to optimize, and maybe two aspects, or the way we were approaching basically from the beginning of looking at blockchain layer as a whole, is really that ODN is a scaling solution for the data.
Right.
And so the things that Branimir is saying is like, we have a network that's live there. How can we utilize what's already there to take on potentially some more responsibilities on this second layer? But then of course, there's always the interplay with the integrity and what type of kind of level of trustlessness or trust do you want to achieve. And then the other one that's pretty big here anyways, which really leads itself into, is that ODN is blockchain agnostic, designed to be blockchain agnostic. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you would change the blockchain altogether, but it could be in a different way of utilizing blockchain, or potentially looking also at the, like, long-term at the developments of other blockchain ecosystem and seeing what is the best fit for something like ODN, right? So, and of course, a lot of times it's like the need is there right now. So I can entirely relate that someone wants to have this solved yesterday, because it's the pain is there now.
It's not just you guys though. I mean, this is any project that's building out right now. It's not an OriginTrail thing. It's an ecosystem thing that it needs to get to that point. And another thing too is, and you said it yourself, I mean, the ODN is a layer 2 scaling solution. So that being said, there is a lot of cost savings in the data side by putting data on the ODN. So even though the gas prices might be higher than we like, there's still a significant cost savings that's happening because of what the ODN offers and the way that it does scale.
Well, there's magnitudes of
right.
Yeah, that's not to say that it cannot even go further, and that's something that should be really, it's something that's really explored through the ongoing, market situation. That's how you learn, sort of technology wise. You figure out what you can actually do, and there's quite a few things that are happening within the team on that front. Like I said, some of the things are just to enable better control, but also like in terms of optimizing, there's several things that you can sort of hash together and have them take even less space within the smart contracts. And you can always sort of introduce more complexity. So that means the node will take over certain things, but you have less or more simplicity on the blockchain layer. So there's always a trade-off, and this trade-off, every sort of edit where you have some sort of improvement, you need to kind of test and make sure that it doesn't break. And also the key thing there is also that it's not so easy in all these to sort of say it for all the teams that are in this space. It's really a wild beast working with distributed systems. It's just anyone ever is going to say, if you don't have to build a distributed or decentralized system, you should not, because it introduces tons of problems. Literally, take any book on it and they will say it. If you don't need to, don't do it.
Right.
Even for microservices, which is sort of kind of the trend over the last years or even decade in software development, it's kind of like the hype thing. It's really good for certain things, but there's not for everything. Sometimes it's even better to build something which is called the monolithic app. So like one big monolith that works well because it's integrated. So in that sense, it's really hard because you're having all this complexity, of building a distributed system. Plus, it needs to be reverse sort of compatible, backwards compatible. So you introduce a big change. What do you do with what's been going on for the past years?
Monolithic only works until you need to be dynamic, and then once you have a dynamic ecosystem, monolithic is just it's archaic, it's legacy. It's not going to work.
Yeah, it's in decentralized contexts, you cannot be speaking about analytics. So it's
yeah, right.
yeah, it's a different beast. But anyway, we're going off track. So.
All right. I'm going to go to the next question, but I'm glad you guys really spoke to the gas thing, because it is a big question a lot of people have. So I didn't mind spending a little extra time on that one. So, all right. With regards to the data crowdsourcing campaign, Trace Alliance is mentioned. Did many of the Trace Alliance members work with Trace Labs in setting up this campaign? So it looked really cool when we saw the information come out with the crowdsourcing campaign. It seemed a little more out of the realm of some of the techie people, as far as we were like, are we looking for data scientists or people handling this type of data? But also, how does the Trace Alliance come into this? Because I noticed in a few spots they mentioned the Trace Alliance. So was this developed with the idea that some of the Trace Alliance members would be on board, whether it be like Deloitte or TE Food or something, or everything, or was it just something that they found out about when we did? Or if you can speak to any of that, I'm sure both of you have a little something to say on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a very exciting project, and it has its place under Trace Alliance because it's really has that DNA of the project itself, because it needs to be inclusive. It's something that we seek to really pull in from so many different sources to really create something that could be universally usable. And in terms of the existing Trace Alliance members, of course, those that have greater relevance for the topic, some of them we have been in touch with and have are aware of and have been involved, but some of them also are out of scope just because medical equipment is not something that they deal with, right? So there's quite a few different organizations there, but it's definitely something that it's not at the final stage. It's something that we really kicked off in a way that can be as inclusive as possible, and we try to invite and incentivize people to really join in. And following that inclusiveness also is we're not only limiting to really, let's say, advanced senior data scientists to take part, but rather enable a wider audience that has a motivation to contribute and would like to take part into it, either from the point of view of being a member of the OriginTrail ecosystem, or because of the just the COVID pandemic situation and willingness to help towards achieving better resilience of the entire global community by utilizing these technologies. It's just something that we feel it's a very good use case for the technology. It's a great use case for linked data because we need to create this knowledge graph around different objects that exist there, and just being also firsthand even exposed to some of the not so great things around these procurement processes. I mean, even in Slovenia, we've had quite a few of weird things happening around there, and even some certification bodies confirming certain things which turned out not to be true. There's a clear need for something that would be a repository of knowledge that has been crowdsourced and can be then offered for this use case. So yeah, in short, really excited. Definitely, we're looking to involve wide audience in this. So we're also, maybe we can take the opportunity for this to invite people to register for the webinar, just so that we can also have an idea as to what type of audience is going to be there, to also tailor then the content itself a little bit better. But yeah, Branimir, I'll kick it over to you if you have anything to add on the topic.
Yeah, maybe just on that data science front question. So I figured maybe that's kind of a scary word maybe for someone, but think of it as maybe from a different perspective. So there's tons of this data already all over the world. Essentially, it's because of this scatterness. It's really a problem of entropy. It's really it's really hard to get it all together. And someone with the data science background might have sort of an easier tool to sort of gather a larger amount of data and submit it. So naturally, that's something that fits the case really well. So someone who is able to utilize data pipeline tools or generally the big data stack, which is quite interesting to just look at because quite a lot of things there there's a lot of them, but not that many. Not everything is super complicated. So what I'm trying to say is that there might be a need to, for example, restructure some data in order for it to be useful, and then maybe someone has mad Excel skills, and that's enough, and someone is able to write a couple of lines of code and do it even faster than the mad Excel skill person. But essentially, it's really just about the skills, but all of the data is relevant and useful. In the end, the outcome that should be achieved is really to build a huge knowledge graph where you can just query something of importance, and it doesn't really matter how it was built. Ideally, we all can build it like this, but it's not it's not doable so much. But if we all join together and actually invest this time into decreasing the entropy, which is really structuring information, that's going to be very valuable. I'm actually super excited because this is the first time we had such an opportunity to crowdsource something so impactful and that can be sourced in a public way.
And I'll tell you, it's you talk about blessings in disguise, silver linings. Like, talk about such a perfect use case for the ODN to happen at such a crazy time in the world that we never even thought we'd be in, and it's just such a great fit. So you're going to really see the ODN come alive with really impactful data that means something today during the pandemic. So I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I think it was last time, or maybe, I don't know if it was the last officers or even Twitter or someone was mentioning, kind of just the use case of COVID, and then we haven't really spoken about it before, but it was definitely in our minds of how we could utilize the tech for something like that for a while, and we just feel that this is the perfect kind of setting to create something.
The world showed it needed like the wheel, and you guys kind of have the wheel and just invented the wheel at the right time. So, so it worked out great. I'm going to go to the next question. Let's see. What is the team's opinion on using Chainlink for TRAC pricing and fast gas pricing? Currently, the data is utilized from centralized sources like CoinGecko, for example, in the bidding process. Doesn't this expose an attack vector if the price feed CoinGecko was manipulated? And there's a lot of talk of Chainlink out there, and they're doing some really cool things with their oracles. And I also noticed that Branimir, in a tweet the other day, mentioned that the ODN similarly could be used as an oracle solution in itself. So, so do you see the need for oracle solutions, like bringing in the gas prices? Does it make sense to go out to different locations and pull that information in, so there's no one gaming the system with one particular link? And also, how do you see the ODN being able to do that? Because you do offer linked data from all kinds of different sources. So in theory, can the ODN also create that oracle solution and pull those gas prices in?
Yeah, so, okay, that's quite a few topics, but let me try and sort of summarize it. So from the perspective of let's say, first of all, the nodes knowing the prices of ETH and Trace and everything. The current implementation is actually sort of the initial one where, if I'm not mistaken, there's, apart from CoinGecko, there's 2 more sources, and then finally it defaults to sort of a configuration default value. But essentially it was intended only sort of as an initial way. So it was built in such a way that it can be extended to support any API. So you can really, for example, you can, edit the code in your node and add another API that you want. So from that perspective, you could observe this sort of solution having sort of an attack vector, but even though it's from the beginning, it's not built to just look at one source. It's already, the mitigation is pretty high, and then again, anyone can edit. So even if some sort of an issue happened, the community could respond really quickly, even without the team publishing an update. But having that said, it's not that it's not being worked on. So one of the things that the recent Uniswap integration was also about is actually that the Uniswap can be used as a price oracle as well, and actually quite good price oracle. So it has its flaws. So it can be manipulated as well because of the front-running problem and the inherent transparency of the system, but it's another source yet again. So having that said, moving on to the oracle problem. what I'm trying to say is that the new nodes are actually going to be looking at Uniswap as well. So we're going to have an additional source, and then the node actually has the ability to figure out what sort of the best situation is. So if you have an outlier in the sources saying something different, then you obviously can discard the outlier and figure out that something's going wrong there. Maybe it's not manipulation. Maybe just systems can go
a bug in the system, or yeah.
And from the Oracle angle, I believe the space is still not sort of so well understood. Generally, the Oracle problem is actually a very wide computer science problem. And the way we sort of in the blockchain space look at it is really, how does the smart contract know of certain, some sort of fact from the outside world that it hasn't been sort of part of the consensus from the beginning, from block, from block one from Genesis block of a certain blockchain. And it's a perfectly valid problem. What you really sort of can look at it from two ways. So you can say, you can go the Chainlink way and have sort of a network of semi or totally unrelated or minimally related actors joining in and publishing a certain value to a smart contract, and then you have this value inside the smart contract. So essentially, providing a more trusted channel for a piece of information that's off-chain coming inside, but or trust minimized. While on the other hand, if you observe a certain already existing data pool as a verifiable data registry, you can consider it as already being a good source of verifiable information. Right. So for example, if you look at a published certificate issued by a certain party that claims that it has issued a certificate, and it's a verifiable piece of information that doesn't necessarily have to be on chain, but in case you might need it in a certain contract because the use case demands so, then the only thing really missing is the framework of how you're actually going to introduce it into the chain and to make sure that it's cost effective in that sense. So you're not pulling, a megabyte of data in a Ethereum transaction. That's not happening. So essentially the idea there is that the ODN is sort of with the right framework, which we're actually in the progress of publishing, can be used as a trusted oracle, but in a bit of a different way. So that it's a different type of an oracle that you would see from Chainlink. Essentially, it's also really tailored, as it's also really more tailored to supply chains. You will most likely see more information being oracleized in the sense of what's going on in a chain. So not necessarily a price of a token, but more of the sense of a state of a certain product or parcel or a ship or, actually the multiple, maybe something that's sort of a real-time operation in the supply chain sense. So not real-time as, price changing every
2 seconds or whatever. Right.
More like, a real time in the sense of GS1, where you have an object moving around and you really want to know exactly where it is, as well as what's been going on with it and who's been interacting with it. So if all these parties are issuing verifiable attestations, which really the offers you see on the network are, and since they're all connected, then you essentially get a framework where the oracle, for example, could be let's say, Guinness, you decide to make a smart contract which executes a certain thing, maybe, I don't know, a payment to Tomaž, when it gets verifiable information from the outside that certain 3 parties have done something. So maybe issued a certificate, another party verified the certificate, and then whatever, the thing was actually imported into the US. So if this then that sort of situation happens, and if you have an expectation in the smart contract that can be fulfilled with the data from the ODN, with the right framework of this sort of interacting with each other, this absolutely fits the Oracle definition in the terms of the blockchain. So
Right.
that's
Awesome.
kind of a difference in that terms of how seeing data from the outside really is in the supply chain context.
And also we can kind of use that for extending certain, let's say, permission settings towards something that's permissionless, right? So if you have a permissioned smart contract that requires some sort of trusted context, and so then that context could be provided by the ODN in a verifiable format. So obviously you then create what are the conditions that you are looking for in the ODN, and you shouldn't screw that up. But as long as you're solid there, like ODN will deliver the context.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. It comes up a lot, and you hear a lot about Oracle solutions out there. So it's good to at least, speak about the ODN when it comes to Oracle's. Here, this is my question. So of course I always got to throw my own in there. But how will node clustering work exactly? If I'm running 2 nodes now, will I be able to cluster those nodes together, almost like a leader-follower relationship, or will I need to create a new node for each node that's running in order to be like a high availability node for that cluster?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we're still in the testing of different sort of approaches there. One approach is that is going to come a little later is going to be the Kubernetes approach, and that's actually going to enable the high availability cluster you're kind of talking about, essentially being able to spin up, for example, 2 virtual machines and have 3-4 nodes on them, or something like that, depending on the specs of the machine. And
Gotcha.
they're running, in parallel. The important part there is there's some things that need to be solved on a very robust level. For example, the network communication, because if these nodes share the same address, we need to make sure that network address translation happens well. In that sense, that from the outside it doesn't look like one node if you're trying to run 4 nodes on 4 instances. But essentially, the whole idea of it is to primarily solve the problem of having a node be able to have minimum downtime, even if something happens with an instance. So essentially, think of it as 2 instances, at minimum running somewhere, and sort of starting with leader follower. That's probably going to be the first approach we go with, and that's specifically because the way actually updates happen. So when the network update is detected, downloaded, and everything is done, it's a little hard to ensure that both, if you have 2 nodes running, that they update at the same time and everything stays synced. So you really want to have one update while the other is taking care of work,
Exactly.
And then when one is up, then you have the other one update. But because you don't need 2 services running at the same time, you're really going to have like the main node service, the core running, and a certain process following, while the rest is really chopped up into services. So the graph database actually utilizes its own sort of replication mechanism, and then the SQL database and the file storage is another service. So essentially, that's what we're looking at. And at the moment, it's going to be, from the beginning, it's most probably going to be the leader-follower sort of situation. And then from that moment on, we're looking at going into full Kubernetes. And that's it's also going to be very interesting from the perspective of enabling this deployments to happen in a more easier way. And maybe I can segue into that topic. I suppose that's probably going to come up. But
People love that topic.
Yeah, I've also kind of didn't even have proper time to look at all the responses and reply to everyone. But I got several of them, including your comments. We're already sort of working on, and that's why I asked you guys to sort of give us some more, some more information to figure out what we should prioritize. And essentially, it's there are several things that we can do in a relatively short period of time. Let's say it like that. So we're actually going to be making it easier to install a node, and that's part of the whole architectural change towards the high availability as well. So There's also going to be other tools we're looking to propose, and some of these tools we would actually we're looking at ways of how to prioritize them to build them sooner. But I believe that since we actually, I mean, we have tons of things that we can work on the ODN. One of the key things we could actually sort of do to make the best out of this effort is to actually join forces. So literally make the user the developer in that sense. Ideally, the node runners could also help us develop things like you've developed certain scripts and so on. So actually what I sort of intend to publish in the next couple of weeks is actually sort of a list of things that we could that we're planning to build, and as proposals that someone can also jump in and sort of move forward. So in that sense, either make the user experience better, or you know, work on something like the OThub, which is also open sourced. So stuff like that would be actually very, very cool to see more coming from the community, because sometimes it might be that you know, it's even it comes quicker to the table before we get a chance to do it.
Right. Well, I'm going to jump to speaking of OThub, I might as well just put this question next. Is OThub is a very valuable tool, which, however, seems no longer supported by its original creator. Would you guys be willing to take over the development and update it, or maybe develop a similar one? And I guess it goes to show that what can happen with these community-made tools sometimes is that it can be great, but then if the original author gives up on it, you're kind of left in limbo, because now you had this tool you relied on, but he's no longer developing on it, and then nobody else is developing on it. So what happens in that situation? I mean, it at least exposes a need and says, hey, I'm glad this was made, because it showed that it was very valuable. But then what do you do with that, even from a team perspective? And I know in the heart of decentralization, in a perfect world, you'd have all these developers creating all these great tools and maintaining them. But now that we have seen a need for something like OThub, and I'm sure the teams even like having OThub in some respect, and finding it useful, where do you see the team being able to continue building upon OThub, or at least updating it where like a proper amount of nodes are showing up, for example?
I mean, we're definitely trying to keep in touch with you know, team members that or community members that really kind of were able to contribute at certain points, something like that, and including BBNM and the others. I mean, it's a great asset in a way to have within the community and the ecosystem. Of course, what we always look at it and in terms of what can we contribute or how we can help at a particular time. Branimir mentioned also OThub was open source. Of course, we put the hosting up so that it can keep on running. Yeah, kind of like we're trying to find the best possible path to see something like that is valuable to be available for the community. Of course, I mean, it would be sad, or it is it you know, it does not function the way it should, and it does not deliver the value to the community. So definitely keen on looking at the best way of how we can create the best setting where things like not OThub as one instance, but also others can either arise or keep on getting better. So I think that's the main goal. In terms of a kind of committing towards a timeline or something like that, that's much more difficult, just because it's kind of the roadmap obviously is taking quite a significant effort to carry out. But yeah, I think what we've seen, and also what we continue to see from the community, is just a very great effort and a lot of positive energy in trying to help also other community members to do things more easily. I mean, Guinness obviously with a lot of the you know, the video content that you've created and the support that you're putting in, and a lot of also others that some of them are today joining in the call as well. So let's say hi real quick, because there's 26 people that kind of came online, which is pretty cool. And yeah, kind of how can we foster more of this? How can we create a better yeah, it's a better setting for these things to exist and to continue to grow. And we're definitely interested in that.
Great. I mean, I even thought it'd be cool to see tools come out, like maybe a visual knowledge graph interface to see all the linked stuff, you know, like something like that would be neat. I mean, I wouldn't begin to know where to even start with something like that. And it might already exist, but just little things like that, I think that could give more insight into the ODN, I think is helpful for everybody.
Yeah, and it is the open source nature of it is very interesting, right? So also Houston as such was open sourced for the very same reason that, you know, if something is pressing and it would be beneficial to someone, they are able to pick up that code and carry on and create an additional feature on it.
So that being said, I'm going to go into this next question because it talks about Houston a little bit and the like. But well, what someone originally put was, could you please add a finish deposit button on the node profile page? There are multiple cases where MetaMask didn't pop up with the second transaction. I know that's kind of more of a something you would send on Discord, for example. But the reason I'm mentioning it is where is node profile going as a site in Houston? And I know what a lot of people weren't expecting was in order to use Houston, you have to have a certificate installed on your node in order to create that SSL connection. Obviously, there's ways around that. That's a lot less secure. But there is ways you can edit it and use it. But where does the team see node profile going in Houston? Is node profile going away and everything just going to go into Houston? Or at some point, could we even see like a mobile app, for example, that allows you to do some stuff on your node that maybe saves credentials or some 2FA authentication? Or as a whole, where's the management going with the open source tools? I guess is really what the question is.
Yeah, so from the Houston and node profile situation, sort of with the SSL, we're actually looking into other tools we could use to make the connection secure still, while actually not relying on HTTPS directly. And essentially, the idea there is that we could we're working on a new version of Houston actually in this half of the year, where the idea is to enable, make these things much easier, but first of all enable it to work in such a way. Now, how would we solve this encryption? There's a couple of things we're exploring, and essentially there's one interesting aspect of it being some emerging standards that are actually quite interrelated with the standards that ODN is already employing. So these are the decentralized identifiers and verifiable credential standards. So essentially, the idea there being that you can essentially authenticate without the need of having a certificate authority issue a standard SL certificate or TLS certificate. So it's one of the key things that we're actually working on when we're talking about Houston. When it comes to node profile, the interface is probably not going to go away. There's no reason for it to go away, really. It's just either going to be upgraded with the features of Houston as well, given that the fact that we still need to make sure that everyone is aware of the difference between the two. And depending on the implementation and the research we're actually doing, it's going to be, it could be that there's no difference also. It could be that you can just, log in with MetaMask and, use everything the same way as on your Houston locally. But then again, it's always going to be a bit of a difference of going into some interface implemented on some website rather than having the code inspectable on your machine. So everybody should really, follow the trust but verify, or don't trust verify, depending on how far you want to go in that spectrum. And definitely, if it were me, I would, for example, always download Houston because you can verify that it hasn't been changed. You can verify its cryptographic fingerprint. You can look at the code. You can see that no one's going to steal, or try to revert or do something with your transaction. So essentially, that's kind of a thing that no matter what happens in the end is going to be true. But what I'm trying to say here is that both of the interfaces are going to be improved somewhat, and importantly, it's going to be more usable because the Houston situation is going to be less of a trouble. And then finally, when you ask on mobile, ideally, the web interface would be agnostic to mobile or desktop. And if you are able to utilize your wallet, which is really the decision of every node runner, is to decide what kind of a wallet they want to use. If you want to have your wallet on your mobile, then technically you could be able even today to use node profile with a mobile wallet that could be the manager's wallet. Again, that's another decision for every single node runner to take. But there's emerging solutions on the wallet front as well. There's really cool things coming from the community, like Argent was something, I believe that's how you pronounce it, Argent or Argent,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's Argent.
It seems quite interesting because it's kind of on the spectrum of full smart contract, multi-sig contracts like Gnosis to something completely old school, like keeping your private key somewhere. It's kind of in between, so it's and the user experience is pretty cool. I've actually tested out the other day, so cool. I think that's in combination with such solutions, it's going to be something that it's definitely going to be moving things forward in terms of UX.
Awesome. That's super exciting. I know Houston's pretty neat, so it'd be awesome to give easier, make it a little easier for people when you talk about making things easier for, nodes and whatnot. That's awesome.
Yeah, then the thing about, sorry to interrupt you again, the thing about the visualization of the graph, that's really also going to, when we think of the graph, it's really looking through the graph that your node knows about. So the graph that it sees. That's a perfect sort of ground for Houston. So for an application to be inside of Houston like that, and that's something that can be built even today. Like you can log into your Arango interface and see that. You could technically do that even through Houston. So it shouldn't be too much of a big deal to visualize. But rather than the problem that occurs there is when it's a huge graph of 5-6 million PGS.
Your computer blows up trying to render the
exactly. You
the graph.
Need to know what to visualize. That's a question I actually get a lot about the ODN. People are quite often asking me, okay, so all the data is there and it's all connected, but what do I do with it? But in a way, you kind of have to know what you're looking for. That's kind of the whole point. So if it's been designed for someone to take a supply chain object which has an identifier and you look for that identifier or a set of identifiers or some value within a range of some values, essentially you need to know what you're looking for. It's kind of like going into a city, like you coming to Belgrade and not knowing what you want to do. So there's cool things to do here as well. Like for example, whenever I go to a city, I like to go to a record store. That's where I buy all my souvenirs. So if I go to Chicago, I'll look for that and I'll find it on Google, and that's kind of how you will find any object on ODN as well.
Well, you take it. I see the Google in all the slides lately. A lot of Google presence put in there. The Google supply chains, and I know you have a new Explorer coming up as part of the roadmap at some point. So, are people going to start to see how the ODN really is kind of a Google supply chains? Is there going to be more advancements in that where it's going to be more notable to people really see how it is kind of like the Google supply chains versus just seeing in the slides, we're the Google supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a goal, right? So, and with the growth of the knowledge graph, there's more things that you can find, and potentially there's more things that are interesting for you, or there's more things that kind of you would know what to search for. So it's even with the crowdsourcing, right, campaign. So that's going to become something that kind of resembles more of a Google-like features, because it's at the end of the day, the connotation that kind of we don't want to have because the centralization aspect of Google. So it's not that. But you'll have that potential of a knowledge graph that's very similar to how Google approaches of putting information in place about what's going on the World Wide Web. Similar way, all the information are structured within the OriginTrail network, and kind of that type of kind of moving towards there is definitely interesting. And it also, in terms of the kind of the value that it can bring, it's very kind of it's similar. The comparison makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. I'm going to ask something from Amos in the chat because he'll kill me if I don't. So, Phoenix. Is the team involved in the new Phoenix initiative by GS1? It seems connected to the project under Horizon 2020, which is connected to OriginTrail. So that Phoenix project just hit the news today. Seems like there's a lot of organizations that are part of it. There's a lot of catchphrase terminology in there that's very similar to what you hear in the OriginTrail world. So you know anything about this Phoenix project? Have you seen it, or is there OriginTrail involved in it at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's in a way it's good. Like we're seeing a lot of the things that we were trying to convince people makes a lot of sense now becoming kind of like mainstream. So, things like interoperability, obviously GS1 was focusing on that as well for a longer time. And kind of that become knowledge graph, again, another thing that's kind of becoming more used as times goes. And a similar way, kind of, I have to say I haven't really checked out Phoenix yet. But what is good to understand about GS1 is that it's a organization that consists of different national organizations, and those organizations can get involved in different projects. So it's kind of also very tedious to kind of keep track of everything that goes around in different worlds, because there's literally a GS1 in every, almost, I think, if not in all countries in the world. So it might be one of the nation kind of GS1s that got involved in some H2020 project. But what is a good thing is that we are indeed closely following some very interesting developments within GS1, which will directly be connected to the ODN and kind of unveil some potential new things. And the good thing is, because they are kind of a not-for-profit neutral organization, whatever will be developed in things like, let's say, the Phoenix project, they'll be compatible with what GS1 has already done before and what they're what they're working on right now. So there's, despite me not knowing a lot about the project, I have to say there's a very high probability that if it is touching the same field that kind of ODN or OriginTrail ecosystem is playing in, will have a very high level of compatibility with what they're trying to set up, just because of the having this very deep-rootedness in terms of how of understanding and putting GS1 logic into the functioning of the ODN itself. So I hope, Amos, sorry for not being able to give you more on the project itself, but yeah.
But you said it yourself that all this stuff supports, GS1 standards. So I mean, if it's getting developed, it's going to work with the ODN. I mean, that's the whole point.
And it's a lot of things that are happening still there, and so we're really kind of as things unveil, we'll be able to kind of also communicate more. But it's not something that's stagnant. There's useful things coming out of GS1, so they hadn't stopped at barcode 30 years ago, 40.
Right, and I see you guys as kind of the poster child of GS1 lately. It seems like for some stuff out there. So it's, I think I'm sure there's some good things coming.
Yeah, I think we align a lot of the things also from the values perspective, right? So things like neutrality, things like interoperability, and kind of not locking in a particular tech or particular vendor. That's something that a lot of it really resembles the way we think about the stuff. So I think that that's why we have a good overlap.
Great. So with the Emergo news we heard recently, can we expect any direct integration between the ODN and Cardano? And even with that, how about Baseline? I remember there was discussions with how the ODN can fit with Baseline. So between Cardano and Baseline, do you see some opportunities there? Are there some being worked on in order to integrate the ODN into some of those?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously constantly keep our eyes open in what is being developed. There's also a clear threshold in terms of what is for us makes sense to work on. So kind of the integrity levels that we are looking for, the interoperability levels that we are looking for. So kind of we have to, that's why we're looking at a lot of different things that are developing around the space to see what makes sense and what doesn't. And Murgo joining Trace Alliance, I mean, we're really excited to have someone like that to be close. They're cool guys. We're really kind of proud also to have them be a part of Trace Alliance, just because I think there's a lot we can learn from each other. as well as approach things together where they make sense. But like I said, it's for ODN to work alongside something. It has to have kind of grounds in, we're open proponents of public networks, of really kind of doing the things that we believe that they're right. And I think that they're in terms of Emurgo, they're one of the actors that are very active in the space, and they're doing a lot of development, and we're excited to see what's going to come out of Cardano. So it's, we have now a platform where we can really collaborate, and that's something that was hugely important, we believe, for both sides. In terms of kind of spilling the beans or on kind of any concrete developments where this might take, I think it could be a little bit too early to jump the gun there. And in terms of baseline, I think some of you guys picked up that we've joined one of their meetings that they've had, just to learn a little bit more also from the aspect of how to approach the ecosystem. Again, we've saw some of the overlaps there, especially they're trying to really be strong proponents of using the mainnet, something that we are obviously putting into action already. But we are seeing that there are some positive things about the baseline as an ecosystem, about how much kind of they can generate in terms of excitement around using the mainnets. And we feel there's a good spillover for both sides if we kind of see what can be done together. From the technological perspective, there is complementarity. So it's not something that kind of it's either or, it's something that can be used together. So it's definitely something that we keep track of, and it's, again, like, I wouldn't want to go out on a limb and saying or committing to something just now, but it's what we can commit to is that the discussions we've had were relevant. We are continuing to follow, and we'll continue to see where can we find a very good space to kind of showcase how these two stuffs together can really make a good impact. Because at the end of the day, just doing something for doing something's sake, it's not like that's not going to cut it yet, right? So we find a good use case where we can really show some tangible value, not only for technology's sake, but also for the sake of kind of the ecosystem, of the users, of the end users of the industry. Then that's a different story. That makes sense.
And I know we all know there's a lot of non-technical people in this very technical space. So when people see Cardano, it's been 4 years, where this technology doesn't develop overnight. There's so much involved in it, and I think that Cardano is doing great things, and I think it's a really appealing blockchain. So when I'm probably going to say this wrong, the Groguin phase of their development, which is coming up, which will introduce the smart contracts and tokenization. I mean, that's going to be a really appealing option for some of these projects building on Ethereum if scaling isn't really met in a timely fashion, I would think.
We'll probably see more, right? So like you said, it takes time, and a lot of projects have been in development for a longer period of time, and even they had some time to maybe focus more on tech during the bear market, if you will. So there are developments that will definitely come to fruition over the course of the next months, or let's say months, that we're interested to take closer look at. And like we were just talking in the beginning of the conversation about the gas fees and
right,
all these ideas of other people working on stuff, or they can trigger something that can be very valuable for the OriginTrail protocol and the network as well. So
And actually, while we're on it, but Branimir, is more of a question for you, is how difficult would it be to port, say Cardano is this amazing thing, right? All these developers are saying, hey, let's move our platforms over to Cardano. How difficult is it to migrate the contract over to something like Cardano, or like existing jobs carrying over? I imagine that'd be pretty involved.
Yeah, so such a migration you don't see every day, really. It's
right.
Something that's not like there's like a best practice, how you can do it. And also it's a different setting for different things. Like if someone wanted to sort of just switch smart contracts from one, because like let's say Uniswap, you want to switch Uniswap, which is really just smart contracts on, it sounds a little like I'm what's the word in English?
Simplifying it.
Yeah, simplifying. It's really an amazing project, and there's, for example, what they've done with the optimization in terms of gas usage is marvelous. It's really very few people could do that. So, but let's say you want to port something like that to another chain. It's one story. Then the other completely different spectrum is really looking at ODN, which is a network of itself. So the ODN gets to speak to Ethereum, or gets to speak to Cardano, or maybe both. And it leaves all this room for opportunity to sort of figure out how to make a protocol out of interactions between these. And what I'm saying there is that really, when you look at ODN and what it really does with the blockchain layer is really takes root in terms of identity. So that means if you have an identity on Ethereum, which sort of in a way always comes down to having some sort of wallets or keys associated to that identity, be that very simple identity or ERC725 or something newer, something similar sort of must exist on a different chain. So if you look from the identity perspective, it's really about using a standard that connects both. So that is really the decentralized identifiers. It's actually really cool to look up. If you look them up, they're already from the beginning looking at different domains for identity that coexist together within one standard. So that's why the ODN is sort of moving in that direction of having DIDs, or how they call them, be sort of the core of actually how we look at identity. So you solve identity on any chain, and then you kind of move forward. If you're looking at interactions between nodes, which are being managed by a smart contract, then if there's two nodes, they could technically look into one smart contract on one chain and maybe at another smart contract on another chain. And since they're able to look at them at the same time, or maybe just decide that they want to look at one because they like it, it's just up to enabling this on the end of the technology. So to sort of sum up, it's not sort of a common thing to do.
Right.
But that's why it's really exciting, because we are in a really good position with the way that ODN is being designed from the start, is that it can actually look at
that.
different things.
We are still very much in the domain of the hypothetical here, right? So for anything like that is, or even discussion around that, is like the amount of consideration around comparing the networks. I mean, right now, Ethereum is full stop still the best
king
option and the most decentralized, provides that integrity, provides that smart contracting, provides all that, and will most likely remain that for a little while. So yeah, in terms of kind of being in that hypothetical space, also us shifting towards the bar at a certain point and having a couple of beers, and then we can really go crazy. There's a lot of very interesting things that you can do, and but the good thing is, like Branimir said, kind of like those are the values that we started off at the beginning, is like not be agnostic about one blockchain, not be agnostic about one data model, and then kind of following that.
And that's something I keep trying to explain to people too, who are like, yeah, but this blockchain is so fast. Oh, it's going to be amazing to replace Ethereum. Listen, enterprise right now is like just dipping their toes in Ethereum, starting to willing to trust it more. It's going to take a long time. Ethereum's going to have to prove itself before these other blockchains become an option, because they have to see it work with Ethereum first. And then once they do, it opens it up.
The main point of blockchain is it gives you that integrity of immutability and not being changed. And the only way you can really kind of build up the street cred for that is just by existing for a long time. So that by definition, you require time in order to be supporting your main pieces or the main value proposition. So it's,
right. And people laugh, they go, well, Ethereum will be like the next AOL. Well, AOL did a lot of things for the internet, and that's what a lot of people don't realize. There's a lot of stuff today we owe because of things like AOL happening. So, and I think people just need to understand that, it might be the MySpace, and then Facebook comes along, but Facebook wouldn't have been where it is without a MySpace, for example. So Yeah, I'm going to go keep going on here. So how many nodes do you envision as a healthy number across the ODN? And would there a number where it would be too much? If, for example, 100,000 nodes online and each of them sends a job bid to response back to the DC, potentially DDoSing a DC. And I think part of the beauty of a knowledge graph, right, is the more nodes, the more it grows, the more robust it gets. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, but this is a very good question because it basically comes down to one of the core problems of distributed computing is really how do you manage the load once the network grows? How do you scale? How does it scale in sort of the best fashion possible? And the best sort of you can look at really here is sort of having a logarithmic complexity growth. So that would mean for example, that for 100,000 nodes, the complexity of operations is, actually, I'm not sure how to pronounce that in English. It's the O, we say the O of log of n, which would be the complexity would be 6, right? So it's actually 5. So essentially the idea there would be that instead of having a lot of sort of interactions having to happen by a DC node when the network grows. Let's say a lot would be n squared. That would be when someone needs to communicate with pretty much everyone on the network. Instead of n squared, you go to log n. So let's say you have 100,000 nodes, square that, it's a pretty big number. But if you take the logarithm, you get 5, right? So the idea is to go that way. And that's where the actual Kademlia algorithm or protocol really works well. It's optimized for certain things, not so optimized for so well optimized for others, but that's how you actually scale the network. So in terms of the ODN specifically scaling to a large number of nodes, essentially it's been designed in a way that it can scale to any amount. So it should grow technically, like you said, the bigger the more resilient. But in that regard, I have to say that there's still a need to prove itself on such a big sort of stage of 1 million nodes.
Exactly.
And first of all, we need to reach 1,000 nodes, and making prioritizations on that sense of working on the most important things at the moment, sort of. Putting some things for later, meaning that for that scalability aspect, that's something that the DHT is very capable of handling already. So Kademlia within the already existing ODN can handle a lot of that, and we're actually working on, and you will see that as the network evolves within the next half a year, there's going to be actually work done on the next iteration of the white paper, which will also be mentioning quite a lot of these findings that we had over the past 2.5 years since the launch of the first white paper, which will include also optimizations on that front. So in terms of network scale, being overwhelmed by the nodes being overwhelmed by the network itself, that's something that is going to be well taken care of with the existing best practices already existing in such solutions. So it's definitely in the books. But we're focusing on what's coming first, at the moment.
All right, awesome. Yeah, I mean, as somebody who's done network upgrades, everything looks great until you put a load on it, and then that's when you find out really if everything works the way it should. But could you please explain the latest reiteration of the litigation process and how it works? So we know in case our node goes down, how much time we have to bring it back online, not risk litigation. But also, is the Hydra replacement part of the litigation already implemented, or is that still another phase we're waiting for to get put in place?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So in terms of the latest updates to documentation, we should really point that out, that Hydra is still to come. And essentially, that's also something that is under review in terms of what we can also do to make it even more resilient and more cost effective. So essentially, the idea there is that litigation, just to reiterate, should only happen if the node is already unable to respond for some whatever reason. And most likely the reason would be that it's just either not working or someone intentionally wants to withhold data. And in that sense, because of this, either of these options not being favorable towards what the protocol wants to achieve, the litigation process only kicks off in terms of the blockchain when there's a certain amount of unanswered challenges. Now, what are challenges? They happen at a random interval in a certain, during the data lifespan of a certain job. So they happen at random because if they wouldn't happen at random, there would be easier ways to sort of trick it so that you can sort of, only in a way maybe hold data when you're supposed to answer to challenges, and then when you no longer need to, you sort of offload data somewhere to, let's say, a hard drive, and you can take more jobs while you're technically not providing data to the network. So that's the randomness there, mitigates this issue. And then once for some reason you cannot answer to a couple of challenges in a row, then essentially the litigation kicks off. And then this process has a time frame which is on the order of magnitude of 10 minutes that you kind of have time to respond. Now, this is not designed in the sense that someone is waiting for litigation to happen and then jump on their computer and turn on the server in these 10 minutes. It's really about the server should be online constantly, but from the perspective of potentially being loaded or waiting for operations to finish, it should have some sort of grace period for the answer to be deployed to the blockchain. Plus, because let's say let's just go back to the gas price issue. If the gas price goes way up and for some reason your transaction cannot go through, then you have potentially even more further delays. So what is really kind of the weakness of this process is the longer you make the grace period, the less sort of the less you can mitigate the issue, while the shorter you make it, the harder it is for a node to recover. So up until now, that's kind of been a good measure. What we're looking for is really how to, together with introducing implementations on Hydra or certain variants of it, how to make it so that it's less of a burden on all sides. So less of a burden on blockchain, so it's less costly, and then less of trouble, of potentially seeing your node down and it lifting itself up for a couple of minutes because sometimes it needs some time to start up. So essentially, there's quite a lot of things that can be tweaked, and unfortunately, it's much harder to test than one would think, because you somehow need to start triggering these litigations.
Right.
So in our internal environments, we try and create networks of thousands of nodes, logical nodes, not physical nodes, but really logical nodes that, you have to design a system that shuts them down at certain times and then triggers litigation, and then you try to bring it back up and see what's a good measure. And it actually takes quite a lot of time to test everything. And then again, it's still a test in sort of a laboratory environment. So that's it's kind of a it's a difference than on the mainnet. But essentially, to wrap this long answer short, there's going to be developments on this front as well. In the next half a year, we're expecting quite a lot of research to be concluded so that we could further develop the protocol itself and litigation specifically.
Awesome. There are a number of pending queries regarding issues regarding nodes on Discord. Is there a way for the team to help with such on a regular basis? Maybe even dedicate a room to node support? The community is getting knowledgeable and responds to most questions, but some require input from the team. So I guess I think some of the feedback I know I hear sometimes is it would be nice if there was a little more engagement on the Discord channels, but I know everybody's super busy, so that's not always easy to do. But is there any plans to kind of be a little more active on the Discord from a node perspective?
We always kind of try to, it's never because we kind of don't think it's a priority. It is, and kind of we try to see how we can best serve those type of queries. So there's always kind of a system around where we can assist if there's really some sort of a challenge that kind of is should be assisted with or something like that. But it's great that kind of the community has that type of help coming in, where kind of there's some things or missteps that maybe someone else has already done that they can help out with, or there's some tutorials that have been created kind of to help others, other peers to kind of get onboarded. So that's awesome. And with the kind of community page that also is coming up later this year, is something that we want to see that type of give that type of content also a place. We've seen a couple of websites spring up already, well, in the last couple of months, which is also great. And they kind of are housing a couple of the more famous videos that have been. And yeah, so I'm hoping that that type of content is keep going to appear. But of course, if there's kind of more a deeper problem with the node functioning, it's not only a support aspect for us, it's also learning, because we get to see the logs and we get to see what has happened, and then learn about how the node functions in the wild, because like Branimir said, distributed systems aren't very easy to build up.
Right.
So I guess we'll do our best to make sure that those type of queries get answered.
Great. Thanks for that. And I don't know the community. I mean, we've tight-knit community. We all know each other, a lot of us out there too. So we try to help whenever we can. And just sometimes there's some stuff you just can't help with because you don't know, you know, it maybe does need that answer. So that's good. Can you give more details on how the TGE estimation till year end has been done? Is it based on growth so far, or are you considering projects you're working on in the background? So we saw these estimates coming up quarter by quarter, and is it you're basing that on stuff, on known usage that is coming up that you know about? Because I know there's stuff that you won't know about that could obviously inflate that. But how are you getting those estimates?
Yeah, it's TGS, right? Not TG. So
I'm sorry, I was just reading it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. No, I was wondering what.
Yeah, no, I was just reading it, but they put TGE, but yes, TGS.
So it's a mix of both, I'd say. So it's some of the estimations and some of the things that we that are in the works that we know that will impact that number. But yeah, I mean, we were excited to see that we've overpassed the. We haven't announced that, have we?
Oh.
Might have missed.
Oh no, go on. I would love to hear it, but
a little bit. But yeah, no, we crushed it for Q2, and there you go. Now that you know it, cat's out of the bag. So that's good, and we are hoping that we're going to keep up the pace and kind of try to stay ahead of the projections for the following quarters. But it's a mix of both. So it's part of the what we anticipate and part of what we know in place.
Well, speaking to that, so there was a slide Branimir put up on a talk a few months ago during the COVID thing came out. He spoke, I forget the guy's name, but he interviewed him for like 45 minutes. And one slide that really stuck out with a lot of people, and you like zoomed in on it, was 100,000+ organizations benefiting from the ODN by 2023. And then that's making people's minds go crazy and so, well, what does that mean? And it's, you know, that's a bold statement, but I mean, I'm assuming what's meant by that is that it's kind of the trickle down effect where, say, GS1 or even BSI, let's take BSI because we know, so BSI, for example, is really pushing the usage of the ODN, and we saw the scan members below them. So, but then there's people below them that are benefiting off of their tech. So I'm assuming this number, when we talk about the 100,000+ organizations benefiting from the ODN, it's using this trickle down effect between customers of customers.
Yeah, so it's basically our vision is that if you want to ensure that you have some sort of sustainability long term in the supply chains globally, you're going to need to have all actors benefit from these trusted data exchanges. So there's going to be small and big ones that have to take part in it, because if you just have the big players, then they'll aggregate, and then that's a problem for the small stakeholders, and then again we'll be in the same cycle. And what DLT really has the opportunity here to do is to have that inclusive moment where we'll have more participants join in. And in a way, I agree. It's a kind of ambitious goal to set out to reach. But in a way, if you think about the knowledge graph, it's that type of impact that we need to achieve in order to kind of realize that the purpose of why we started to do this all together, right? And yeah, so you are right to assume that it's a top-down will fairly often be an approach where you'll have kind of organizations that have a large global impact that can disseminate or proliferate this technology to a wider use and to wider set of stakeholders. But there's also going to be bottom-up things happening, like the campaign that's setting off right now, right? So that's an entirely bottom-up approach where we'll just, but again, enable organizations that maybe are either producing, distributing, or suppliers to take then for themselves to get involved and to benefit from some sort of trusted data exchanges that they can set up with those that are procuring, let's say, medical devices in this case. So there's a lot of different bits and pieces that are adding to this story, but the bottom line is we need to have a wide kind of approach when coming to that.
Awesome. Yeah. Again, people just seek numbers and they speculate and they get excited. There's a lot of
companies in the world, and and like you said, there's already an existing networks that we are involved with that are reaching a great number of those companies globally. So yeah, it's we have a kind of a solid way towards that number. So there's yeah, although it's ambitious, it's also something that's relevant and
reasonable. Yeah, awesome. When main dish? I don't know, it's in the chat, so I'm going to ask it. Are we going to hear some big announcements coming up in Q3? This summer, are we going to start hearing some new stuff? I'm not asking what. I'm just, is there stuff we should be looking forward into in the next coming weeks or even next month or two?
Yeah, when the chef lets it out of the kitchen, right?
Yeah.
There is. So the way you know that it's a lot of things are getting generated by not only current work but previous efforts that have been done, and so there's a really high buzzing, not only within our organization but also within the ecosystem. There are just quite a few opportunities that are for us very, very exciting, and I'm sure that once it gets out of the kitchen, that also the interested community is going to find it exciting as well.
And I'm assuming we might start hearing more about the Oracle partnership coming up soon too.
Yeah, again, I don't want to.
Yep.
Which so kind of there's a lot of potential within that type of an organization, and obviously. Network operating system already being on the marketplace is something that is a very good placement, because it gives a very good exposure to this entire basically partnership network that Oracle has. And definitely, I'm sure that looking at the roadmap, you'll see some of the things that are relevant also for that type of ecosystem. And so. Yeah, we're excited to see not only Oracle, also other partnership kind of that are in place or are being built out to really get benefits out of the ODN, and that will also translate into some tangible value for the ecosystem.
Awesome. Well, I don't want to draw it on too much longer. I mean, I think it's past your dinner time there in Slovenia, so yeah. I got to go to work after this, actually. But is there anything you want to close with? Anything you guys want to say, or?
Branimir?
I like to speak a lot, so it's best that I do, right? Yeah, it's. I want to say, really, it's been great that we are doing these monthly office hours. I think.
I'll be honest. I think these are getting better. Every time I think the last one was so cool, I feel like the one after gets better. Like, I don't know. Is that just me, or like?
Giga wasn't here, right?
Oh yeah, that's because Giga's actually not talking. He's in the chat, but he's actually not. You can't hear him talk.
I've seen him in the chat before. That's why I'm mentioning it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is it's a much better way. For everyone, really, just to keep up with the project, and also for us to get to speak with you and to directly in a way through you as a proxy discuss with the whole community. not so chat Twitter-like way, but really, it's refreshing, especially in this whole COVID situation. But yeah, I think it's other than this, also the Twitter is really cool. So I'm actually going to be probably asking more questions to you guys, because it could be useful a lot to help us prioritize certain things that we work on, because sometimes we end up getting into these complicated algorithms and things, and might not necessarily be aware that there's something that maybe can be easily fixed quickly, but it's just not on top of our priority list. So
well, also I tell people, it's funny because it's like people only wait till this to say anything, right? But I said, have you guys seen Branimir? I've seen him do like tweets 1 of 32, like in response to them. Like, don't be afraid to ask him on Twitter. If it's cool or relevant, he'll probably answer you. I mean, you don't have to keep it just speculating or wondering or waiting for. I'm like, I said, throw it on there. He'll probably give you a whole list of stuff below it explaining it for you. But yeah, and you're usually really good for that. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's it for today, guys. So, one more thing. You guys are still hiring, right?
Yeah.
I know a very talented unnamed developer from an unnamed organization that I had reach out to you guys, and I just want to make sure that they're going through the right channels. So they get this Trace Labs. You can apply in Trace Labs site, or even ping you guys and Twitter or something like that. I would think
Trace Labs on the website careers is perfect, just because then it follows our process the most neatly, and we make sure that it doesn't. I mean, it's there, so we'll definitely attend to it. But even through other channels, feel free to kind of reach out. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, great guys. Well, awesome show. Can't wait for next month's now. So I hope everybody else we got all the questions we could in. So have a good night.
Thank you very much. Enjoy, everyone. Bye-bye.
I'll see you later.